There are wide receivers. There are great wide receivers. And then, somewhere far above all of them, there is Calvin Johnson. Picture this. You are an NFL cornerback. You line up across from a man who is 6'5", 236 pounds, and runs a 4.35 40-yard dash. The moment the ball is snapped, you realize there is absolutely nothing you can do. He is bigger, faster, and stronger than you, and he catches everything that comes within a zip code of his hands. He is not a wide receiver. He is a force of nature wearing a Detroit Lions jersey. His name is Calvin Johnson Jr. The world knows him as Megatron. This is the story of how one man became the most physically dominant pass catcher the NFL has ever produced, and why, even years after he walked away, no one has come close to doing what he did. Calvin Johnson was born on September 29th, 1985, in Tyrone, Georgia, a quiet suburb south of Atlanta. By the time he hit middle school, he was already 6 feet tall. His parents prioritized education above everything. But when your son is built like a Greek statue at 13, football finds you whether you go looking for it or not. At Sandy Creek High School, Johnson racked up 1,179 receiving yards and 18 touchdowns for the Patriots. College scouts descended from everywhere. Rivals.com named him the top prospect in Georgia for the 2004 class. Alabama wanted him. Florida State wanted him. Half the SEC wanted him, but Johnson stayed home and chose Georgia Tech. Half the SEC wanted him, but Johnson stayed home and chose Georgia Tech. Critics questioned that decision immediately. Georgia Tech runs the triple option. Not exactly a receiver-friendly system. They said Johnson was leaving yards, touchdowns, and draft stock on the table. What the critics missed was simple. Calvin Johnson didn't need a fancy system. He just needed a football. In just his second collegiate game, he shredded Clemson's secondary for 127 receiving yards and 3 touchdowns, helping lead the Yellow Jackets to a 28-24 victory. The ACC had a new problem. He won the ACC Rookie of the Year award that freshman season with 837 receiving yards and 7 touchdowns, made All ACC the following year, and then in his 2006 junior season, Megatron was truly born. Johnson finished with 76 receptions, 1,202 receiving yards, and 15 touchdowns, earning him the ACC Player of the Year and the Fred Biletnikoff Award as the best college receiver in the country. He set Georgia Tech records for career receiving yards and touchdown receptions that still stand to this day. All of it in an offense not designed to throw the football. After that season, the only question was how high he would go in the NFL draft. The answer: very high. At the 2007 NFL Combine, Calvin Johnson officially became a national phenomenon. 6'5", 236 pounds, and a 4.35 40-yard dash. His vertical was 42.5 inches. His broad jump was over 11 feet. Every single measurable placed him in a category that had simply never existed before for a wide receiver, the size of a tight end with the speed of a cornerback. NFL teams began projecting him into the top 5 almost immediately. The consensus was clear. Calvin Johnson might be the best skill position prospect in a generation. The Oakland Raiders held the first overall pick and took LSU quarterback Jamarcus Russell, a decision that went down as one of the worst draft mistakes in NFL history. Russell threw just 18 touchdowns in his entire career before washing out of the league entirely. The Detroit Lions took Calvin Johnson second overall and briefly, almost incomprehensibly, considered trading him almost immediately after drafting him. There were internal discussions about moving him for quarterback help. For one terrifying moment, the Lions almost didn't keep the greatest receiver they had ever laid eyes on. They made the right call, but for Megatron, landing in Detroit meant landing in the middle of the worst stretch in franchise history. Johnson's rookie season in 2007 produced a solid 756 receiving yards and 4 touchdowns, a strong foundation for any first-year receiver catching passes from a revolving cast of quarterbacks. But 2008 was something else entirely. The Detroit Lions went 0-16, 0 wins, 16 losses. The only team in NFL history to go winless across a full 16-game regular season. Coaches were fired, players were benched. The city of Detroit watched their team self-destruct in real time. And through all of it, Calvin Johnson went to work, catching passes from 3 different starting quarterbacks. Johnson finished with 1,331 receiving yards and 12 receiving touchdowns to lead the entire NFC. He was one of the most dominant receivers in the league on a team that won absolutely nothing. He showed up every single week, ran every single route at full speed, and made every catch that was physically possible to make. He was somehow left off the Pro Bowl and All-Pro teams anyway. The snub was staggering, and it only fueled him. In 2009, the Lions used the first overall pick on Georgia quarterback Matthew Stafford, finally giving Johnson a franchise QB to build with. But Stafford battled injuries in his rookie year and ineffectiveness in 2010, throwing 21 interceptions across 13 games. Even so, Johnson still produced 1,120 receiving yards and 12 touchdowns, and finally earned his first Pro Bowl selection in year 4. He had proven the most important thing about himself. It didn't matter who was throwing him the ball. He was going to make plays regardless. Everything changed in 2011. Stafford was healthy and fully developed as a starter. The Lions had added weapons and built a legitimate offensive line. For the first time in Johnson's professional career, he had a quarterback with a rocket arm who could actually exploit everything he was capable of. The NFL was not ready. Through the first 5 weeks of the season, Megatron had 9 touchdowns. 9. In 5 games, Detroit stormed out to a 5-0 start, and Johnson had 451 receiving yards and 9 scores. Numbers an elite receiver would be proud of for an entire half season. Opposing defensive coordinators were running out of ideas before October had even ended. But the moments that defined Johnson's 2011 season came at the very end of the regular season. Week 15 against Oakland, 9 catches, 214 receiving yards, 2 touchdowns, 214 yards in a single game, a number barely any receiver in the history of professional football has ever touched. 1 week later, in Week 17 against Green Bay, Johnson came back and went for 244 yards and a touchdown. Back-to-back 200-yard games to close the regular season. Then came Detroit's first playoff game in over a decade. Against the defending Super Bowl champion New Orleans Saints, Megatron caught 12 passes for 211 yards and 2 touchdowns in a 45-28 defeat. One of the highest single-game receiving totals in playoff history. In his very first postseason appearance, he finished 2011 with 1,681 receiving yards and 16 touchdowns, and was named first-team All-Pro for the first time. He had arrived completely and undeniably as the most dominant receiver on the planet. And then he decided to top it. Every defensive coordinator in the NFL spent the entire 2012 offseason building a specific plan to stop Calvin Johnson. Double teams, safety help over the top, bracket coverage all game. They tried everything. It didn't matter. Starting in Week 9, Johnson went on a run the NFL had literally never seen before. 8 consecutive games with 100-plus receiving yards, a new league record, one that still stands today, years later, with the passing game operating at its all-time historical peak. Nobody has matched it. Over those 8 games, he accumulated 1,254 receiving yards, more than most NFL receivers produce in an entire season. And he did it while the Lions were falling apart around him, going just 1-7 during that stretch. Entering the final 2 weeks of the season, Johnson had 1,667 receiving yards. Jerry Rice's all-time single-season record, 1,848 yards, set in 1995, considered permanently untouchable, was suddenly within reach. Week 16 against Atlanta, 225 receiving yards. The record fell. Jerry Rice's monument, a number that had stood for 17 years, was gone, and a new, almost mythical number appeared on the horizon. 2,000 receiving yards in a single season, something no receiver in NFL history had ever done. Johnson needed 172 yards in the finale against Chicago. Stafford threw at him 14 times, 5 catches, 72 yards, a 26-24 loss. The 2,000-yard season slipped away by a hair, but what remained was untouchable. 1,964 receiving yards, the all-time NFL single-season record, never seriously threatened since the day he set it. First-team All-Pro for the second straight year. Anyone still doubting Megatron had officially run out of arguments. If 2012 was Calvin Johnson's greatest season, October 27th, 2013 was his greatest single game. The Lions hosted the Dallas Cowboys in what became one of the most jaw-dropping individual performances in NFL history. Johnson caught 14 passes for 329 receiving yards and a touchdown in a 31-30 Lions victory. 329 yards in 60 minutes of football, the second highest single-game receiving total in NFL history. After years of defensive coordinators studying every piece of film ever shot of him, building specific game plans around containing him, they still had no answer. He finished 2013 with 1,492 yards and 12 touchdowns in just 14 games. His third consecutive first-team All-Pro, his third straight season averaging over 100 yards per game. A stretch of pure, sustained individual dominance the modern NFL has never seen replicated at the receiver position. The physical toll, however, was beginning to catch up. Johnson was not a receiver who protected himself. He attacked the football at its highest point. He caught passes in traffic. He absorbed monster hits from safeties and linebackers and showed up the following week and did it again. That style of play, magnificent as it was, has a price. By 2014, he was limited to 13 games. In 2015, his final season, he produced 1,214 receiving yards and 9 touchdowns. Pro Bowl numbers for any other receiver in the league, a quiet final chapter for Megatron. On March 8, 2016, Calvin Johnson retired. He was 30 years old. The retirement shocked the football world. Johnson had missed only 8 games across 9 full seasons. He was still performing at an elite level statistically. The assumption was that Megatron had years of production left. But the physical price had become too steep, and the Lions' persistent inability to build a championship contender around him had worn on him in ways that went beyond football. He later revealed the organization refused to trade him despite his desire to compete for a Super Bowl. He walked away without a ring, 2 playoff appearances, the greatest individual receiver of his generation, and perhaps of any generation, on a franchise that never gave him a real shot at a championship. Here is the thing worth sitting with. He still broke Jerry Rice's record. He still had 3 consecutive All-Pro seasons. He still had the 329-yard game. He still set the mark for consecutive 100-yard games. He did things no receiver in the history of the NFL had ever done on a team that could not consistently win. And the numbers he produced in Detroit are almost certainly lower than what he would have put up anywhere else. In 2021, in his first year of eligibility, Calvin Johnson was inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame in Canton, Ohio. It wasn't debated, it wasn't close. He is the all-time single-season receiving yards record holder, an 8-time Pro Bowl selection, a Biletnikoff Award winner, the standard by which every elite receiver who comes after him will be measured, whether they like it or not. There have been faster receivers, receivers with more touchdowns, receivers with Super Bowl rings, but when it comes to the pure, undeniable, overwhelming act of being physically impossible to guard, there has never been anyone like Calvin Johnson. He walked into the NFL as a kid from the suburbs of Atlanta. He walked out as a legend. And for 9 years in Detroit, in a city that needed something to believe in, he was simply Megatron. Unstoppable. Unguardable. Unlike anything the game has ever seen before or since. If you want more stories about NFL legends who changed the game forever, hit subscribe and join the Blitz community. Every week we bring you the stories that remind you why you fell in love with football. And if you're ready for more right now, click the video on your screen.